Okay, so we're going to do a little bit more with rotations this time and translations, but we're going to make a new script and we're going to learn how to rotate around, say, an arbitrary axis or point. So let's go ahead and create a new script, and let's call this camera movement. So let's go into it. Okay, so we've already made one script that handles moving our cube around, and we're going to leave that one the way it is. But now we're going to make a script that takes the camera in our scene and rotates the camera around our cube. And to do that, we'll have to use a variant of the rotate function that takes a few different pieces of data. The first thing it's going to take is a point to rotate around. So in this case, we want to rotate around our cube. So let's start adding variables that we know we're going to need. The first thing is, we'll say object to rotate around. And this is going to be of a type transform. We've talked about transforms. We know that we can access the transform of the current object that the script is attached to, but now we're going to actually be accessing a transform from a different object. So this script is going to be able to take the cube and talk to its transform. The next thing we want is a speed. So we'll save our and then rotate speed. We'll let that be a float, and we'll have it a default, I don't know, 8 is fine. Finally, we need an axis that we're going to rotate around. We could hard code this, but we can also just create a variable and expose it to the editor here, so that we can, before we even start running the game, or the demo here anyway, we can modify it. So let's go ahead and create one more, and we'll say axis to rotate, and we'll give that a vector 3. The cool thing about exposing a vector to the editor is that you can access the X, Y, and Z components separately and specify whatever you want. So here in the update, we're going to use our transform again. So we're talking to whatever transform we have this script attached to, and we're going to use rotate. We're going to use rotate around. Rotate around takes a few different things. In this case, we're going to pass in our point, which is what we essentially where the object is we want to rotate around. So we stored that in object to rotate around, and we're going to use the dot operator and access the actual X, Y, and Z, because that's our point, and that is stored in position. Then we want the axis that we're going to rotate about, and that's stored in axis to rotate. Finally, we need an angle. Let's go ahead and actually provide an angle. So we'll save our angle equals float, and we'll set it to a default of 20. So that's 20 degrees in this case. So we'll say angle, and we'll multiply that by time dot delta time. So we'll be rotating around at such and such angle, you know, every update. So there we go. I think that's all we need. The last thing I'm going to do is introduce a new function called look at. It's a very useful function. It's going to keep our camera actually looking at the object that we're rotating around. So we'll say transform dot look at, and we pass in the object that we want to look at, and it goes in as a transform, so we can just specify object to rotate around. So really quickly, let's take a look. We've got the object that we're going to rotate around, which in this case is going to be our cube. We've got a rotation speed, and maybe I should actually put that in here. Rotate speed. There we go. We have the axis that we want to rotate around. In this case, we're going to use the y-axis, and we have an angle. So let's go ahead and save our script. And let's find our camera. It's right here. And let's drag the camera movement script onto it. So now we need to fill it out because we've got some stuff here that we need to specify. The first thing is the object to rotate around. The nice thing about Unity is that we can just grab the object from the hierarchy, click and drag it, and stuff it in the exposed variable. So now it comes in as a transform. You can see it right there. We've got the rotate speed set to 8. I think that's okay. And the axis to rotate around comes in as a nice drop down. So I'm going to specify again the y-axis by setting that to 1 and the others to 0. And we'll leave the angle the way it is. So let's go ahead and hit play. Well, I forgot that we left our movement script on the cube, but it's kind of cool that we did, right? Because now our cube is flying around, and it has this nice rotation going on. But let's go back to the cube, and let's go to the move my object script and edit it really quickly so it's not moving around so much. In fact, let's not let it move around at all. Let's go ahead and take the translation and comment that out. We'll leave the rotation in there because it's kind of cool to show that we can have these two scripts going at the same time. And we'll go ahead and hit play again. So now you can see in the game viewport here, and also in the scene viewport, that our cube is rotating around the y-axis, but our camera is also rotating around its axis, or that point, and also along the y-axis. How can we change this to see what the different results might be? While we're actually letting this go here, let's click on main camera, and let's change the axis that we're going to rotate around. So I've hit 0, so we're not rotating around anything. Let's rotate around the x-axis. So there you can see we're now rotating around a completely different axis. We can set that to 0 again. We can rotate around the z-axis. And you can kind of see that we are indeed rotating around the z-axis. To show it better, maybe I'll rotate this. You can see the z right there. So you can sort of imagine a line there representing the z-axis, and we're rotating around that. So that's hopefully some intuition there now with how you can, again, expose some more variables to the editor, more about rotation, and how to rotate around, essentially not necessarily the transform of the object that the script is on, but rotating around a specific point. So essentially in this case, kind of an arbitrary axis that we've defined to be coming from the cube. And we also saw the handy function look at, which is extremely useful if you want to keep the camera looking at something in the scene. So if you're making a game and you have a main character, you're probably going to be wanting the camera to always have that main character in sight. And so that is an extremely useful function to have. In the future, I'll probably go over even more about transforms and translations and rotations and stuff like that. But this should be enough to get you started. I think what we're going to do in the next lesson is talk about basic input and having that that input do things like this on the screen. So maybe moving your character around with the arrow keys or something along those lines.